Welcome to the program. Just ahead, Jim Compton of the City Council. Our topics with him, the just completed Seattle budget and the new call for hearings about the performance of City Lights top manager. And later we take up these same themes with two voices from the outside. Seattle Times reporter Bob Young and Seattle PI reporter Kathy Milady join us. We begin, however, with the news. It was up, it was down, it was up, and then it was done. The monorail victory was sealed on Tuesday with a count of the final batch of absentee ballots. One of the closest elections in city history. The win margin was less than 1/4%, but a win it is. The city is expected to loan $20 million to the monorail so they can begin their work before the car tab tax starts getting collected in January. On now to the city budget. It was still in some flux at the time we taped our show last week, but we now know the whole story. Notes, agreements, broken agreements, vote swappings, even soul searchings. It wasn't the prettiest negotiation there ever was here at City Hall, and yet the budget did get passed on Monday. We've interviewed both the council and the mayor about the process and the product. Their tone is a bit sharper than is typical in Seattle government. Was this year any different from past budget negotiations? Here's Councilmember Jan Drago and Mayor Greg Nichols. You decide.
Instead of having budgets where we're getting record revenue growth year after year, where it's not necessary to say no to anything, we now have scarce resources. We have to make very hard decisions. We have to balance priorities. And that's a different way of thinking for the city of Seattle. It takes a new way of doing business, and it takes more discipline. It's one of the reasons I'm concerned with some of the decisions that the city council made.
Well, in my experience, it's not typical. That this is not the way we've done business in the city of Seattle, in contrast to King County Council. City Council has been about good government and making good policy, and not about making deals. The mayor, Mayor Nichols, and Deputy Mayor Cease, they've learned and practiced their politics at King County Council.
Another complaint heard a lot from the council during this budget season was about not having enough information from the mayor to make informed spending decisions. Was there more or less cooperation than in the past? Once again, we go to the tapes. Jim Compton versus Greg Nichols.
We really didn't know, because the budget was so tightly held and held so secret, basically. We didn't know until very late what we were going to be dealing with. And then there was considerable difficulty in getting information from departments. And so it has not had a collaborative tone to it.
We certainly are a different administration, and I'm just fine with that. The people who are putting the numbers together for me are some of the same people. And the budget director has worked for me, for Mayor Schell, for Mayor Rice, and originally for the City Council. And I have asked him whether the amount of information and the responsiveness is similar to, and what he tells me is we have, in fact, provided more information earlier than any of the other administrations he's worked for.
You claim
so
you're
it
better
is baloney.
Baloney, whoa. Finally, did council members actually forge a kinder and gentler budget than the mayor? Who does win the humanitarian award over this spending plan anyway? Is it the council? Is it the mayor? Roll tape.
I think that our results are going to reflect that this is a bread, not bricks year for the council.
The council, regrettably, I think, at the end of its process, began to talk about bread versus bricks. And I guess I want to respond to that and say that I think that's both artificial and it's inaccurate. The Seattle City Council added $4.6 million to add a plaza in front of the new City Hall in this budget.
Must-see TV right here on the Seattle Channel. The Municipal League of King County came out swinging against City Light this week. The good government organization says that council members owe it to ratepayers to conduct public hearings over the performance of Utility Chief Gary Zarker. The Muni League says that such a forum is the only way to ensure that Zarker is indeed the right person to continue leading the entity. Councilmember Heidi Wills, who oversees City Light, says that Zarker should be given more time to show progress before any such hearings are conducted. Wet housing got a new home in Seattle this week. What, you ask? Here's what. A planned apartment building for chronic street alcoholics in downtown won the go-ahead from the city this week. Some nearby businesses argue that allowing such people a home where they can drink will be bad for the neighborhood. Proponents, however, say it saves money by keeping street inebriants out of hospitals and detox centers, and that abstinence is an unrealistic goal of this troubled population. The wet housing project is set to open near Denny Way and I-5 next year. And while we're on the subject of alcohol, drink up, folks, for Pioneer Square may soon be dry. Okay, not completely. Hearings were held this week to determine whether the historic district should be designated an alcohol impact area. The plan would ban the store sales of potent beers and wines, and there would be no alcohol sold between 6 and 9 a.m. All this in an effort to tackle the problem of chronic public drunkenness. The Liquor Control Board will make a final decision in a few weeks. By the way, sports fans, this won't affect alcohol sales at either Safeco Field or Seahawks Stadium. This news, too, out of Pioneer Square. The law of unintended consequences is alive and well in Seattle's most historic district. Residents have been cleaning up the alleys in that part of town by removing trash dumpsters. Only problem, rats that once munched on garbage in those side streets are now finding their way into buildings in the area in search of new nourishment. City health inspectors are looking into the problem now. And now our regular neighborhood roundup segment. Events making news outside of Pioneer Square of late include the new Seattle Justice Center. It officially opens this week in downtown. It will house the police department and the municipal courts. Second, some Capitol Hill residents are protesting the new Walgreens on 15th Avenue. They say the store is not communicating with the neighborhood as law requires when it comes to their new building. The store is expected to open in a few months. And soon it will be safer to live near Magnolia. The pedestrian and auto crossing at the foot of the Magnolia Bridge gets closed in December. That's made possible by a new flyover ramp that opened earlier this year. Railroad cars can now go through the area with no worry about hitting anyone. And finally, our City Inside Out calendar of upcoming events. The holiday season is fast upon us. Come downtown for the Bon Marché Holiday Parade on Friday, November 29th. That same evening, catch the Westlake Tree Lighting Celebration. And finally, for those on First Hill, there is a community council meeting there on December 14th. For more information about any of these events and other aspects of our program, we are always pleased to direct you to our website at seattlechannel.org. That wraps up our news. We take a short break here in our action. When we return, Councilmember Jim Compton with more to say about the city budget, and later reporters from both the Times and the PI with their thoughts about this busy week in city politics. All that ahead when City Inside Out continues in a moment. We now welcome Jim Compton to the program. He is fresh out of hearings and meetings and negotiations over the city budget. It is all behind us now, but what have we learned and what does it mean for the future of the city? Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
The mayor came on the other night and said to me in an interview that your budget isn't sustainable. You got the last word here.
Frankly, that's politics. And I think people are tired of hearing this stuff. And if you seriously think that the 9 dedicated, mature people on the Seattle City Council would put out an unsustainable budget, that's very misguided, very mistaken. But I can give you examples. There were a lot of things we could have done that would not have been sustainable. There are a lot of fund balances. For example, the police pension fund has $1,200,000 or $1,400,000 sitting in it. We could have grabbed that and used it for a one-time only flashy gesture like buying more library books or doing something for some other city department. We didn't do that. We did the responsible thing. We did it in consultation with the finance director about what was sustainable and what we could do. And I really just don't think that that's a fair assertion.
One thing he said was that your revenue generation was optimistic. Your plans include for adding 1,600 more parking meters around town. They said there isn't near enough room for that, and there isn't near enough appetite for that.
Well, those discussions were guided by the transportation department, which works for the mayor. So if we got bad numbers on that, I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised that this has come up. And we can certainly go back and look at it. But it was our intention to do a cautious, sustainable budget, which, by the way, restored human services, restored cuts to police and to fire, and got it back to, I think, a much more humane budget.
The other thing he said, and it's about information exchange, and you and I talked about this the other day in the program we did about this budget with the council. He said baloney to this idea that it was harder than in times past to get information. He said it was easier, you got more information, you got it sooner in the past.
Well, we got a volume of information. The trouble is that it didn't always tell us what we wanted to know. And I mean, he can say baloney all he wants, and once again, I think that's politics. I think we could have done a better job on the police budget had we gotten certain information about force levels and so forth in a more timely way. But, I think that the public is frankly tired of hearing about this, and I don't know why we want to replow the same bloody ground and go back and forth over this. We are interested in making good public policy, not in having wars. And that's what we did in those 2 very, very exhausting months and those hundreds of hours of work done by the council. So I'm proud of what we did, and the mayor can say baloney if he wants.
The other thing that came up at the last minute was several million extra, I think $4.5 million extra, to add a plaza to the new city hall. The mayor says, listen, they want to call it a bread, not bricks budget. If you look at it, they got more bricks in this budget than bread. Why the add-on, and how was that justified?
Well, look, we sold the Dexter Horton building, which is at 3rd or 2nd and Cherry, and there was a substantial profit, and we directed the profits from part of the profits from the sale of the Dexter Horton building to finishing City Hall. Now, what he's talking about is that there's a corner, it's the northwest corner of City Hall, which was meant to be a kind of a beautiful public space, and we have the option of finding money to either finish it. It's a $100 million plus building. And if you want to put a brick wall up there and have people walking past back and forth in front of an unfinished building, that's fine. But we took the money out of the sale of the Dexter Horton building and some general fund monies and put it toward funding a beautiful new public space. I absolutely will take credit for that and take the fall for that, because why we would spend the money we spent on a city hall and not finish it mystifies me.
And I suppose he could veto that if he wants to.
That's
if
right.
He's really serious
Absolutely.
about that. Public health, another item in the budget. He made an argument during his proposal that we got to phase out Seattle's contribution to public health. It's a county and state responsibility, and Seattle ought not to be doing it anymore. Mm-hmm. You folks restored most of that money to public health, but he claims that you did it with the proviso or the understanding that you agreed to this idea of phase out. Do you agree to the idea of phase out?
Well, what we
just
agree
slower
with,
than he?
Look, the question is whether the community health clinics are aggressively collecting all the money they could from federal sources and from Medicare and Medicaid and from private insurance and so forth. How we disagreed with the mayor was he said, well, drop it. And we didn't think you could drop 8 community clinics, drop them off a cliff. We've given a transition plan to them that says, look, we're going to keep you funded and make sure that the Pike Place Clinic, which serves older men who often are the most vulnerable population for medical care, and the Odessa Brown Clinic and the Pike Place Clinic, their Pike Place and the Pioneer Square Clinic, that we've said to them, keep up your good work, and meanwhile, start trying to figure out how we can find a sustainable funding source for medical care. And it's something the region has to step up to. I mean, what it tells us is that the medical care system is in terrible shape.
You and I talked, as I said last week, some other council members. We talked about the note. We talked about fire engines. I'm not going to rehash that. If anyone wants to do that, they can go see that tape. But let me bring up something the mayor did talk about, which is the personal budgets, his staff budget versus your staff budget. When he was on the other night in our program, he said, here, look at this graph, and we don't have it, but just the point is your staff has grown and his staff has been roughly flat. Your response, you got the last word here.
Well, my response is that the mayor, although he has on paper 23 here, 24 full-time staff, draws from every department in the city. Every department in the city and technically works for the mayor, and he borrows liberally. And so he can borrow a specialist, as he does, from Seattle Public Utilities or from City Light to come over to the office and take up the workload. We don't have that flexibility. And by the way, the council, by my calculations, added about 6 staff in 10 years. This is for a $2.5 billion budget. And let me tell you that the people on the Seattle City Council, and that means my staff and the central staff who work for all of us, are the most overworked, exhausted people in city government. And anybody that wants to come and watch those people, they did several all-nighters during the budget where they simply are grinding out this massive work. So I am completely unapologetic about that we have a staff that, if anything, is way too small for our needs.
And the legislative department's about 70 people, I think, if you take your whole department.
Yep.
You don't have the option of borrowing here, borrowing there?
No, no, and there was a time in the past when access to city departments was really shut down to us by the current administration, that we did get more information and more support from city departments. We're on our own now.
On to City Light. The Municipal League sent a letter to council, to mayors, saying that you ought to do reconfirmation hearings for Gary Zarka, the superintendent of that utility. Why haven't there been reconfirmation hearings? Apparently every 4 years, he or whoever sits in that position should have them.
Well, no, it's optional, and it's certainly, the burden is on the council if there's any question about the performance of one of these tenured utility heads, either in the water department, the Seattle Public Utilities, or in the electric utility. The burden is on us to say, is this person doing their job? My trouble with reconfirmation hearings is that they're only a part of the problem. We got back an audit that I asked for that cost $170,000 from the Vantage Corporation. It's a Florida corporation, which painted a pretty stunning picture of a utility that's gotten itself in a lot of trouble. The utility is $1.7 billion in debt. I mean, it's a staggering amount of debt. The question is, what kind of a work program can we give to the utility that's going to fix all the stuff? And simply looking at the superintendent and his performance is only a part of that picture.
But he's clearly a big part of that picture.
Well,
and isn't
sure.
it worth it to...
But what I really want to avoid is any sense of scapegoating or of going after one person, when what we've got to look at is, do we need a chief operations officer? That's what the audit told us. Do we need to add to the chief administrative staff of the utility? Do we need an accelerated strategic plan? And most important, do we need risk analysis? We've got to bring somebody in to upgrade our risk assessment.
You say this utility is broken.
Yeah, I've used the word busted, and by that I mean that the morale is low. There are so many questions about what happened during the California energy crisis, which, by the way, the audit said did not alone explain the problems of this utility.
They go back farther than that.
They go much farther than that. But the point is that this council has to aggressively seek changes in the utility. The mayor's talking about creating an oversight board, and to me, it's one more task force. And I completely agree that in the long run, we need more oversight. In the short run, what we need is to fix some of the management problems.
One more minute left. How do you continue to review and assess the performance of Gary Zarka, who has been there for several years, not just through the energy crisis, but during the years that this audit has complaints again? How do you continue to judge his performance if you don't do reconfirmation hearings?
What we're going to do, and this has come out of my office, we're going to put a contract on the table that says, are you prepared to do this and this and this? And we'll see. And if
with
Gary,
real clear milestones
with
and
milestones
performance measures.
and with deadlines and so forth, and we'll see. And confirmation hearings may be necessary to regain public trust. We'll do what's necessary.
Thanks so much for being here, Jim Compton, the Seattle City Council. Stay with us. After a short break, we welcome 2 City Hall reporters with their take on it all. City Inside Out continues in a moment. We now welcome 2 City Hall reporters to the program. Kathy Milady is with the Seattle PI. Bob Young is with the Seattle Times. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Kathy, let me begin with you. Seems to be much more cantankerous, rancorous, all those kinds of adjectives than in the past, and I'm speaking of budget negotiations.
At City Hall, you bet. It's the City Council versus the mayor and all the things that we've been hearing. Over the last few months, they all came into public play, and it was very clear that there's a bit of animosity going on there, or a little tug of war, at least, for the power.
Are you surprised at how strongly the mayor defended himself about this note and the whole fire engine and the that last-minute budget negotiation?
I don't think he actually, I think he defended himself, but I think he was very confident in the way that he handled the situation. He told me in an interview that he will never hesitate to use the power of the mayor's office for the better of the city. And I think that's what he thinks he was doing at the time.
Bob Young, let me get you in here. We just finished an interview with Jim Compton. He reiterated that it's tougher to get information from this mayor than it has in the past. He said that quite a few times. What's your sense of being up there and talking to all these 9 council members? Was it indeed harder to get information or not?
Well, my sense is that the administration did respond to what was an avalanche of questions. I mean, this was a more contentious budget than in the past, so I think the council had a much greater need for information than in the past. They asked, as the mayor's office said, they stopped counting at 1,400 questions. We saw plenty of responses, plenty of detailed responses to questions, so I'm not sure that isn't a residual complaint from earlier in the year when there was actually, when the council did perhaps feel more frozen out. They could no longer go directly to departments for information like they had in the past. The mayor did kind of issue an edict saying, information should come through us. There should be kind of a centralized
So they got the information, but maybe in a different...
They got the information, but I think I don't know if they got the information that they asked for. Some of the council members will say that the information they got was not what they were asking for. It was not as complete as they wanted, or just simply didn't address the question as they needed it. But I think they're missing the one-on-one contact, the accessibility to the department heads that they had in the past.
Are you surprised that that the personal budgets got to be such a big deal? I mean, they had this agreement, we're told, to not talk about personal budgets. My staff versus your staff. Everything else is open, but we won't talk about that.
I think this is becoming very personal. I'm not surprised at all that it came down to being about personal budgets. I think both sides are very sensitive, and what we saw was sort of the result of that.
Bob Young?
Well, the surprise, was that the mayor felt he had an agreement with the council leadership in particular, and apparently, the council leadership didn't have all the rest of the council members on board with this agreement. So, they felt they had an agreement. I think that's the way things were done, perhaps at the county. It was a little more political if council leadership said they had the troops lined up, then indeed they did. And so they felt a deal was broken, and that's why I think things got rancorous at the end and are growing more rancorous now. Prior to the note, council members Drago and Steinbrook were quite complimentary of the mayor and the tough job he had in preparing the budget. So there was kind of a abrupt change in relations there at the end.
You're surprised that the note was actually delivered in the form of a note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the big surprise here is not that politics, operates this way, but rather that somebody put something in writing. I mean, I think that's what's really different here, and that somebody was the city's finance director, Dwight Dively, who I think it's fair to say is not the most political guy. I mean, he's a professional who's praised by the council for his integrity in advance of all this, and I just think that this is not. I mean, I think it shows some of Dwight's political naivete.
I mean, it was almost a pleasant note.
It was quite nice. Yes, it was. Sorry.
Sorry,
we're taking away your engine.
Yeah, right. And for those who don't know, of course, the note was delivered when the council decided to lower the mayor's budget, and he said, "If you do that, I'm not gonna give you your fire engine back," which they then reconsidered, and he got the fire engine.
I do think that it played out. It seems kind of in the best possible way, all things considered, for the mayor. In that, I mean, the news kind of broke on a Saturday, which is when people pay, I think, the least attention to the newspapers. And also, the editorial writers were, they had done their thing for the weekend. So you didn't see these editorials over the weekend, hammering the mayor. So I think that they escaped, with less damage than there could have been.
A couple more minutes here on the city budget. There was a question about the sustainability, and part of it was that the mayor says you can't add 1,600 parking meters, which is something the council did to increase revenues. There aren't enough room for them. There's not enough appetite for them. Have you heard anything about whether that was a reasonable add-on, not a reasonable add-on?
I don't know. We have to kind of wait to see what the transportation, there's a transportation study that's going to be coming to the council that will explain a lot more of this. Certainly it's one way to raise revenue. It's not always a very popular way with retailers and customers and people who work in those locations. I don't know where I have to wait and see, like everyone else, where those meters are going to go in.
Well, most of them are headed toward South Lake Union area.
And that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and also, the council already once has revised its revenue projection from those meters downward. So that's already happened once. Be curious to see if it happens again.
I did hear someone say it's rather odd that don't meters go on sidewalks, and here the council was eliminating sidewalks and adding meters. We'll figure out how that
Meters in
works.
the
This was
sod.
about $1 million out of the council's budget to buy these new meters
Yeah.
this year. We'll start to see the revenues late in 2003 and later.
City Light, the harsh letter came out from the Municipal League, good government organization that's been looking at City Light for quite a while now. They are calling for reconfirmation hearings of Gary Zarker, the superintendent of City Light. No one in the council seems to be taking that idea and running with it. Bob Young?
Well, I don't know how much appetite there is for, you would think, I think there are two things, whether there's reconfirmation hearings, and then what do the reconfirmation hearings lead to? Now, the Municipal League itself is going to, I guess, still debate whether they're going to call for Superintendent Zarker's resignation, if you will. That's still to be determined. The mayor told me that he didn't seem to have any problem with the reconfirmation hearings, but he does still have, confidence in Gary Zarker. So the question becomes, what is the purpose of the reconfirmation hearings? And I would agree that there doesn't seem to be appetite on the council for removing Gary Zarker.
They're very upset with City Light, and yet, do you find the appetite up there?
There is no, I think there's very little interest in actually getting rid of Gary Zarker at this point. The council is focusing more on what Jim Compton calls the busted utility and getting the entire thing fixed. They're leaning toward bringing in a chief operating officer with utility experience to maybe make up for that lack of utility experience that Gary Zarker has.
I'm a little bit surprised, though, and I suppose the public is, when you see all these harsh reports. I mean, not just the Muni League, but two independent audits that took on City Light. I mean, almost no one's saying it's been managed well, for the last several years, and yet the management stays in place.
I don't understand it. I don't understand it either. I don't know why the city council isn't taking some action, why the mayor is sticking by Gary through everything, the customer service problems, the billing problems we saw earlier in the year, and now this audit report, and it's up to the council, I think, to take some action.
Well, as the council likes to say, this is a kinder, gentler time for them, and so apparently that extends to Superintendent Zarker as well.
Because they do seem reluctant to initiate any kind of hearings to be fair, Jim Compton was just on, we just got 30 seconds here. He is pushing hard for a performance measure and a contract in effect with City Light.
That's exactly right. He's probably going to be proposing that to the council early next week.
I would suggest, though, that if this rancor that's surfaced again between the council and the mayor were to escalate, maybe Gary Zarker will be a victim of that.
You could be the fall guy for that. Thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Bob Young and Kathy Milady, City Hall reporters for the PI and the Times, respectively. Thanks so much.
Thanks again.
And we thank you all for watching. We take a break next week to celebrate Thanksgiving, but we're back in early December. Check the Seattle Channel website for information about playback times. And with that, we close. I'm C.R. Douglas. For all of us here at the program, thanks for watching. See you next time.
You're watching the Seattle Channel, connecting with life in the city.